Really, we need everyone who's building technology to think of the downstream impact in terms of their product on not just individuals. Of course, you don't want any individuals harmed by your product. Do no harm is a great mantra as a minimum, absolute MVP. But you need to go beyond that now. You need to think about how it may inadvertently, your product may exclude or harm groups, communities, right? So, if you think about some of the financial technology, or rather the algorithms in that space, there are whole communities that are, have been redlined and are less likely to get financial products that are now almost exclusively offered online to the vast majority of people. Really it's this point about being aware that when you build a product, you really need to think about how it's going to impact someone who does not have your, your background, and in some cases your advantages. And anyone who works for a tech company usually has an advantage, whether it's a socioeconomic advantage or any other advantage. So just being really aware of that. And then the last thing I'd say on this is that essentially these people that create these products, engineers and leaders in this space, are being asked to think about how they can bring an ethical framework. And so you can look, there are templates now for how people who create products can think about introducing an ethical framework of how they judge relative harms, etc., against individuals and communities. So I would say that is the starting place. And Rome wasn't built in a day. There'll be some people maybe watching this who've just got no idea and never thought about it before. Awareness is the first step on the journey. So you're aware now that this is something you should think about, and that's fantastic, and I'm grateful. But I'll be more grateful if you actually do something, to be clear. Tech culture is a really interesting area because clearly there are extraordinary things about tech culture, not least, first and foremost, innovation. But there are some less great things about it, as everyone is aware. And those less great things are really problematic. On many levels, both surface level, it's problematic about who you see in that culture, who is represented in that culture, and at a very deep systemic level, it's problematic. Like wherever you are in the equation, actually, there's a huge amount to grapple with. I think a lot of it does come from the initial start-up culture, which is an incredible culture. I mean, it does mean you work 20 hours a day. It does mean you beg your friends to come and work for free. It therefore does mean that there's an equity issue just right there. Like, who can afford to work for free? You answer that question, that will tell you a lot about who is able to be there on the ground floor when the culture is then built out. It's like, all right, we understand why a lot of tech companies inadvertently built a culture that was not diverse, and therefore, by extension, without a lot of deep thinking about, therefore, by extension, is not inclusive. The same, that those two are not necessarily a corollary, but 99 times out of 100 they are, right? And so, you can have, for example, all white male teams that create extraordinarily diverse products. The example I always give is my favorite TV show called The Wire. The Wire, widely considered, one of TV's greatest TV show by many critics. And that it was also really the first interpretation of authentic diversity, a lot of people would say, including me. What's really interesting is that whole creative production team, the writer, the director, the team, they were all white men. But what they did was the writer, David Simon, he spent 4 years sitting on a corner in Baltimore watching what was happening to the Black community there before presuming to write about it. In other words, he became a real, genuine authority, or I should say knowledge. He had true knowledge. What you really need, it's not the lived experience. You need the empathy to actually understand what the lived experience is in practical terms, day to day, that daily struggle. You need that empathy, and then you need to do the hard work of actually go and discover what's happening on the ground, and then you can step into that. I love being asked about the connection between US politics and big tech. Like, what's the through line that brought me from 20 years in the UK Parliament to Silicon Valley? I mean, I guess on the one hand, it's that, Silicon Valley and the tech industry has rewritten the corporate world and corporate rules. Tech is deciding the future of the world. It decides life chances. It will determine whether you get a job interview through the algorithms that are used, whether you will even get a jail sentence or parole in many American states. It is algorithms and technology that decide that. And of course, access to the 21st century digital economy, right? So now that big tech is so inextricably linked to both the public realm, democracy, the news that you receive and choose to follow and interact with. For all those reasons, I think that tech is actually inextricably bound up with politics. You can call it a big P or a little p, but it's politics. It's about whose voices get heard, who has the opportunities. My favorite phrase is culture eats strategy for breakfast. And what that essentially means is, people like me can come up with the greatest strategies that they've written and put on a shelf behind them, the greatest strategies in the world. If the culture doesn't support the strategy and is not moving in line with where the strategy is trying to get, then it will go up it will be eaten, chewed up, literally. Yeah, that's the point about it being everybody's job, is because it links directly back to culture. And culture is something everybody contributes to, albeit, leaders contribute most and therefore must take that responsibility and have accountability, but so must everyone else. And so I don't want anyone, whatever your background, if you're a white man, I want you to know that you can be a diversity, equity, and inclusion genius. Because here's the thing, we need everyone to become a leader in DEI. And as it happens, I don't want to do down any of the women of color like me or any of the other underrepresented groups, but hey, the people disproportionately with power at the moment in Silicon Valley, for the reasons we discussed at the outset, are more likely to be white men, white and, depending where you are, Asian men. And so we absolutely want them to be confident in being able to engage in this space. I really hate the narrative, which is, oh, you can only get into DEI if you have that lived experience. No, that's rubbish. It might be what pushes some of us in there. We need you to open DEI up, take it out of the compliance box, take it completely out of there, put it in the innovation space. And then you're going to start to come up with better products, but you're going to build a better culture and you're going to have a better company. But you have to stop thinking about it as purely tick box. That doesn't mean that you throw out data, and to get data, you need to tick some boxes, but that's a completely different thing from being in the innovation space, which you can build on top of that and make DEI meaningful for the culture, for the company, and for those people from underrepresented groups who want to succeed the same as everyone else inside tech. So the ACT report really came about because I had felt for a long time that all these different companies, and I've been in the DE space one way or another for at least 20 years, right? And it just was a really deep realization in me that we could just carry on, each of us who leads DEI in each of these many different companies. We could just keep going round and round and round in our little hamster wheel. But until we were actually in a position to come together, to accelerate what we do, to really fundamentally increase the open source aspect of best practice, there are actually incredible pockets of deep expertise around DEI in different tech companies and in other companies, not just tech. It's never brought together. It's never built on. It's never laid out in such a way that you could actually overall 10x. I always talk about 10x is how do you increase tenfold, 10 times 10x what you're doing. And they will do that for everything else in the world, but not think about it for DEI. And DEI, it has to be done collectively. You will go further, faster, together, and we have an emergency in terms of DEI. We have too many burning platforms, and the only way we are going to get beyond agonizingly incremental change in the tech industry is if we do work collectively. So that was the inspiration behind convening the expert working group of academics and think tanks in the tech industry who came together to create the ACT report. I think the next big leap in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion will be a much deeper understanding of how product plays into this space. Where we've been until now is that the vast majority of DEI programs, not all, and there are some honorable exceptions, but on the whole, the vast majority of DEI work has been in the human resources space. Now, we haven't solved that HR space, which comes back to the conversation around culture. And that is, we are nowhere near far enough down the road there. So we must do this thing. I'm sorry to say it always confounds business. Often it's like, hey, we're gonna have to walk and chew gum at the same time. So we've got to keep going on that human resource aspect. But you can't just change the culture for the people inside the company. Of course, that's going to permeate out. But so I was like, look, okay, we're spending all this time and energy on the 100,000 people within Google, as well we should. It is our responsibility. But I just wonder, isn't it also our responsibility to think about the 4 billion people using Google products? If you're going to worry about the 100,000, you've got to surely be worrying about the 4 billion, right? And for every tech company, essentially, or any company that creates product, yes, you've got your internal culture, and your internal culture will be reflected in your product one way or another, even if you don't realize that now. Yes, it will be. But also, you need to specifically and explicitly spend time on how your product is impacting many, many more people outside your company's, figurative 4 walls. You need to get to that product space where your product interacts with individuals and communities. And I think that's where the DEI space is going. We should have got there a long time ago, but better late than never. And I think if you see how product can impact communities both negatively and positively, it's time for us to really double down there. And I'm excited about a lot of the amazing work that I've seen with my own eyes that's going on, but we need to be able to spread that best practice and accelerate the timeframes for getting change here, because it's been a minute, hasn't it? And it's time. #it's time. People that want to dive into this, I hope you've heard me mention the ACT report, but it really is for anyone, whether you've never thought about this before ever, and that's fine. As long as you start now, that's fine. Or whether, like me, you've been in it for 20 years. I mean, there are recommendations in that report that I am talking about, like, oh, wow, I never thought of that, right, let's see what we can do. And anyone can go into it. We've tried to make it as accessible as possible. Well, I hope that gives people a starting point, because otherwise it can be overwhelming, and we need it not to be, because you can drive incredible change if you're just courageous enough to say, yeah, I'm going to spend a bit of time doing this because it is worth it, because it is about my own personal values, because it is just unacceptable otherwise to have a place where not everyone has the same opportunity to succeed, regardless if they might have the grit, they might have the resilience, they might have the talent, but if your hiring system isn't even going to let them in the first place, then, you know, we don't believe in that on the whole. On the whole, don't all have to believe the same thing, but, you know, on the whole, we believe in meritocracy. And what the ACT report is about is making meritocracy real. Because at the moment, it's slightly delusional for us to think that we all just got here just because we're really good at the job. It's not enough. Anyway, thanks for all the questions.